Good evening, folks, and welcome to the TalkSports program, our midweek program where we chat with the movers and shakers of sports, the sportsmen, sportswomen, the administrators, past and present. Well, this week, our guest is the president of the North America, Central American, and Caribbean Athletics Association, or what we call NACAC. And we're speaking of Mr. Mike Sands. Well, Michael Sands for the formality, but Mike Sands for short. Everyone knows him as Mike Sands. Well, he joins us live from Nassau in the Bahamas. And just to let you know briefly that Mike himself is a former track and field star. He represented the Bahamas about twice at the Olympic Games, and among other regional and international championships, including the first ever gold medalist for the Bahamas at the 1975 Central American and Caribbean Athletics Championships. Well, Mike is speaking to us today as the president of the NACAC region. He was first elected in the summer of 2019, July of 2019, when he replaced the retiring Victor Lopez of Puerto Rico. And well, as president of NACAC, Mike is also a member of the World Athletics Board. He is the area representative. Well, it's probably the opportune time for me to welcome our special guest on the program this evening, Mr. Mike Sands. Mike, yes, he's there. Mike, good evening to you.
Good evening, and it's a pleasure to always share some time with you. Thanks for having me.
Right, I know it's always not just a pleasure, but a busy man like Mike Sands, you know. But Mike, as I indicated, you will be speaking tonight as the president of NACAC, which brings to the fore some level of responsibility in terms of the person in charge of athletics in the region. And when we say in the region, we're not just talking about the Caribbean. We're speaking about the Caribbean. We're speaking about North America, Central America, and the Caribbean region as the representative, as well as representing the region on what was once the IAF. The IAF family, what is now known as World Athletics. But I want to greet you, Mike, and first of all, track and field, athletics, like many other sports in the region, had its turmoil period, and I'm speaking about the competition in being affected by the pandemic, and I know it means quite a lot of sleepless nights for you and your folks. We know at this point in time we're still deliberating about the Caribbean Games, but generally, Mike, how much so that track and field was affected over the past year and a half at least, due to the fact of the pandemic?
Well, Mike, it's been a very, very difficult, challenging time for all of us that are involved in any way, shape, or form. I think all of our lives have been changed tremendously and drastically. Planning is always a moving target. We've made plans to host the games, different events, and the challenge is that everything keeps changing. And so it's been extremely difficult to plan with any degree of certainty. But nonetheless, we still continue to plan. We've had several events that were scheduled, several regular events. Our NACAC director of competition, Michael Sorrelta, who was out of Puerto Rico, like me, he has had sleepless nights because we have to keep changing our schedule of events that we have. And so it has become very difficult to plan with any level of uncertainty, but that does not deter us from our appointed responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Mike, in particular, the athletes rather from the NACAC region, I just don't want to say just the Caribbean, but they carry the weight of competitiveness throughout the World Athletics family. So it means that, therefore, that if the NACAC region is affected to some extent, World Athletics is affected to an extent, I should say, right? Because we have the Europeans, we have the Africans as well. But a lot is dependent on the NACAC region. So it means, Mike, that while that is the case in terms of how, and we briefly mentioned about the sleepless nights, it means that you and your folks, especially the technical people, will therefore have to, put in a lot of work, depending on the member federations as well, and what is happening in the member federations. So, in a nutshell, Mike, are you hoping that coming out of the pandemic, and I look in the post-pandemic period, that the NACAC region will be ready to take on its responsibility?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind. I have all the confidence in the team that have been elected by the membership. And let me say that I am honored and humbled by the confidence that has been reposed in me by the 36-member federation, 31-member federations, really. We have associate members. And of course, we provided them with a manifesto that gave them the confidence to believe that me and my team will be able to lead the region. And as I said, unfortunately, COVID came along, and you might have heard me said before that in our area we're used to earthquakes, even volcanoes and hurricanes and snowstorms for the case of our brothers and members in the north. But nobody was prepared for the extent to which COVID has wreaked havoc on all of our lives. But we have not stopped from planning. We meet on a regular basis. My general secretary and I, who's out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you may know Keith Joseph. We on the phone at least 3 or 4 times a day. The director of competitions, we're on the phone, we're on Zoom. And, a lot of pluses, Michael, has really come out of COVID, notwithstanding the setback. We've also been able to create a lot of opportunities that would not have otherwise come to the forefront, and so at the end of the day, they say necessity is the mother of invention. Well, obviously, we had to reinvent ourselves, as I think most persons in the world had to. We had to reinvent ourselves to continue our program. And so we have done just that. We have basically reinvented ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, Mike, how you're hoping that the member federations in particular ensure, because at the NACAC level, in terms of the yourself and Keith and others, at the board level is one, but the support at the ground level, meaning the member federations. And I guess as much you're referring to constant contact with your member federations, this pandemic provided that platform to where you can probably meet as regular as possible virtually. So I assume that is what you're referring to as well.
Yeah, actually, were it not for pandemic, I honestly believe, Michael, that we probably would not have met as frequently as we have been meeting. We have a monthly information session with our membership. We have established several working groups and commissions, including the Gender Leadership Competitions Commission, the press, as you very well know. We also have the competitions, and we have a number. We have the Medical Commission with Dr. Adrian Lord. We had the Constitution, and Michael, I'll tell you something. We have actually been able to amend our Constitution. We have had information sessions with our membership. Like I said, we meet on a monthly basis. 2 weeks ago, Bob Hirsch, along with Abby Hoffman. Bob Hirsch, as you know, is a former IWF Wet Athletic Senior Vice President, and Abby Hoffman is a member of the council, but she's also from our region. We also, from our area, we also have Willie Banks, who is on the council, the Wet Athletics Council for the United States. But at the end of the day, we have been able to actually amend our Constitution, and we have gone through the Constitution with the membership to get their input. And I have to tell you that, in my view, I think our biggest accomplishment to date so far is being able to amend the Constitution at warp speed, where all of the member federations have been involved. And so we meet with them on a monthly basis. Had it not been for COVID, I cannot tell you that we would have been so engaged with all of the member federations. The commissions that we have in existence, that we have created, also goes across the gambit of our member federations. We have appointed persons from our various federations. We also have an athletes commission that has been very, very active, and we're in communication with them, and they are with us. And so, at the end of the day, we have been very, very busy doing the work of NACAC. The only thing that we have not done is an actual physical competition since I've been able to take office in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Mike, when we speak about NACAC, and one of the flagship of NACAC in terms of competitions, obviously, is the Carifta Games, and we know what is on the horizon. Well, we have been hearing what is on the horizon, and while you may not be able to speak about something definitive as it is now in terms of a decision, what it is, can you tell us, Mike, regarding the Carifta Games, which was put off for last year and seems to be in some bit of bother for 2021?
But Mike, I think the Carifta game has been a bit of bother for all of us. I think we all are aware that the Carifta game is perhaps the preeminent junior competition anywhere to be found in the world. I like to say that every child in the Caribbean that is a member of the Carifta family aspires to make his country's Carifta team. So we don't, because more often than not, sometimes that may be the only national team that youth may make. And so we do not take Carifta very, very lightly. I think Carifta has been one of the biggest contributors to our area's strength and development as it relates to the Caribbean. So we have been doing everything possible to ensure that the Carifta Games goes off, and there's nothing against anybody's control. We had an information session with all of our member federations, as I told you, that we normally do. And that's last week. We had 2 weeks ago, I think, we had an information session where Bermuda gave its report. And its report was based on the condition as it were in Bermuda at the point in time. And the members directly themselves were able to ask a number of questions to Bermuda. Bermuda then was given instructions or directive, if you will, to come back to the membership with certain information that was requested to give all of the members a level of comfort. Once we received those reports, we will then now have to be able to make a decision as to where we would go in terms of Carifta, because we as the council and the membership at large, right, there's a certain standard that we have with Carifta that we want to maintain. And again, to no one's fault, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to maintain the integrity of the games to the best of our ability under the circumstances that we all face in the world. So once we've been able to review Bermuda's report, the council will then meet and we'll make a decision. I can tell you that we will probably be able to tell you that within the next, by the end of the week, certainly by this coming weekend, Monday or Tuesday at the latest. We will have to make a final decision on the position of the Carifta Games.
Yeah, Mike. And but looking ahead, Mike, the importance of the Carifta Games. So let's look at just as 2020 when the games were put off. But at that time, we were hopefully looking forward to just staging it at a later date. But if for some reason the report suggests that the games cannot be staged in Bermuda, what are some of the contingency that NACAC may be thinking of?
Well, Mike, I have personally reached out to several of our member federations. The only contingency would be in the likelihood that Bermuda is not able to do so at this juncture. I have personally reached out to several of my member federations, asking them if they would be in a position to take on the games in the likelihood that there's not. But now you have to understand and to appreciate that there's a financial cost to those games. But I have this hope. Maybe it's a tunnel hope, but I have this hope that someone somewhere along the line will just come to the forefront and say, guys, what can we do? Because it does cost some money, right? It is a cost associated. And I always use the phrase cautiously optimistic, but I also tell you that I'm a realist. And so we ask as a contingency, it is very difficult to say beyond whether it's another member federation, a government, or a combination of an agency will come to the forefront and say, okay, based on our circumstances within our country, whichever country it is, whether it's the Bahamas, Antigua, any one of our member federations, Jamaica, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, any of those, if they're able to come to the forefront, we would gladly accept the offer, provided that the news out of Bermuda is not what we would expect it to be. So that is really where we are right now. The contingency is that I've been already looking at or speaking to member federations with the view that is it possible for them, understanding the financial constraints that the entire world and indeed our area is facing. But I would like to to say to those persons on the sound of my words, especially those persons that have the ability to be sponsors, that they ought not look at it as an overall cost, but as an investment in our young people. It's an investment in our legacy as an area, because all of our athletes, for the most part, we will celebrate this edition whenever we can pull it off. Will be the 49th edition, and then the next edition will be the 50th edition. And I will tell you that Carifta is the longest continuous junior competition anywhere in the world. And so at the end of the day, we would want to continue that legacy. And of course, we would need help to make that happen. So anyone that's listening, and I know we have a very strong diaspora of the Caribbean within the New York area. And so I put out a plea there that anyone that is listening to look forward to assisting us if and when the need arises, because it is the development of our young people that makes all of us as a Caribbean diaspora, no matter where we are in the world, when our young athletes perform on the world stage, we can truly say that they came through the Carifta program, and that those persons that would have been a part of supporting us can, beat their chest no matter what country you represent out of the diaspora.
Mm-hmm. Mike, well, while we're on that issue regarding the Carifta Games, and I know it has been, touched on, previously on, past presidents and others, but the whole issue of NACAC and the Carifta Games and the member federations, would we see a time in the future where the games could be staged outside of the traditional Jamaica, Bahamas, Bermuda, down to Grenada and Trinidad and Tobago, and possibly, well, we know Guyana is also earmarked in terms of South America, but, the Cuba and the Virgin Islands and others may be able to host the Carifta Games as being part of the NACAC family?
Well, it's almost like a catch-22. You mentioned Cuba, for example, the Republic of Cuba. The Republic of Cuba is a member of the NACAC family, but they are not members of the Carifta family. As you very well know, Carifta was born out of the CARICOM, the Free Trade Agreement. And but to answer your question directly, when we have our Congress, right, it's not like we purposely select the big countries, as you may refer to them as, Bahamas, et cetera, et cetera. It is an open and transparent offer on the table. When it's time for hosting, we ask member federations, which is open to all member federations, to submit their bids for the games, right? And then, of course, we take that into consideration when the countries do. Unfortunately, for any number of reasons, some of our smaller member federations are not in a position to bid. I think one of the most challenging is the fact of proper facility or adequate facility, and even more so accommodations to be able to accommodate the number of persons, which numbers in the area of about 600 athletes at a given Carifta Games. And so there's a challenge with the accommodation side of things. But at the end of the day, right, we are open to any of our member federations, even now as we speak, right? We're open to any of our member federations who believe that they can host the games to step forward and always offer themselves so that the executive council can review the offer and then act upon it.
See, right. Yeah, well, interesting enough, Mike. Well, that is said in terms of that, and I know the other argument in terms of the Virgin Islands has to do also with the issue of travel, transportation, visas in particular, when I refer to the U.S. Virgin Islands, right?
Well, like I said, if the U.S. Virgin Islands, I think if the U.S. Virgin Islands or any member federations, as a matter of fact, I think right now, we're making effort to ensure that all of our member federations, in the first instance, at minimum, have a synthetic track. And I think right now, there are only 3 of our member federations that do not have a synthetic track. But at the end of the day, that's one of the things we're looking at. And the other things we're looking at, as I said, to encourage them to host events. It is for them to make the determination whether or not they are in a position financially and infrastructurally to make the offer. But we are not able to go to them and insist that it happens. So they, through their member federations and their members and support of their governments and the corporate sponsors within their areas of jurisdiction, would be the one to come forward. But I can tell you, my arms are open to any of our member federations to offer themselves as a host for any of our events.
Okay. Mike, we'll touch on Tokyo separately, but what are the other major activities that will be taking place this year in the NACAC region in terms of athletics?
One of the major events we have, other than we have the age group championship that is still on schedule. And speaking of member federations, the Nicaragua is scheduled as the host. We had to just move those dates again, and it's now scheduled for December 17th and 18th in Nicaragua. That's one of them that is on the table. We also have the NACAC under 18, under 23 championship that is scheduled for Costa Rica, and those dates I think are July the 9th to the 11th. All right, and so those are the major events on our calendar. We also have the cross country championships that are scheduled, and all those events had to be put back. One of the bigger ones that we have on our event as well as a first time NACAC event is the NACAC New Life Invitational that we had scheduled since last year, and we had to obviously keep moving it. And today, again, my competition director and we have just met again. And while we have it scheduled for, it'll be officially announced, of course I'm saying it now, but again, it's scheduled for June the 5th. Okay, and if all goes according to plan, that event will take place in Miramar, Florida. And that's an event that we're hoping to attract a number of our area athletes, as well as include relay events so that our member federations will have an opportunity to continue to attempt to qualify for the Olympic Games, and those that have already qualified to be able to have a good competition and hone their skills. And so those are the 3 or 4 major events that we have on our calendar for the remainder of the year. And of course, we have our NACAC Congress that is scheduled for July to take place once, and if we go to Costa Rica for our age group championship.
Okay. And Mike, that going into Tokyo now, let's look at Tokyo. All eyes will be on the NACAC region as per usual. So in terms of those who would have qualified and and such like that, how much you think the fans of track and field, and especially those who have been following the NACAC region, can look forward to the level of competitiveness from the NACAC region, bearing in mind, Mike, that all that has happened over the past few months, athletes may have unable to qualify, may have pulled out for reasons, and some may not have been probably their best. But what are you expecting in terms of NACAC's showing at Tokyo, 2021?
Well, Mike, this now, the pandemic has now forced our coaches and everybody else, the athletes, to step up their game, to think outside the box, because the normal training pattern has been interrupted. The normal number of competitions where the coaches and the management staff of the athletes can plan their schedule accordingly, whether they're going to peak for this event or participate in this event, etc. That has all been changed. The dynamics have changed. But I have all of the confidence in our coaching in the NACAC area, and that's close from Canada on down to Central America, that the athletes would be in top form to be able to meet the standards that would require them to be able to participate in Tokyo. And once we arrive in Tokyo, I also expect our performances to be to the par that we have become accustomed to. And that bar has been set extremely high over the many, many years. But if you look at what has been happening on the stage, on the competition stage that is happening throughout the area, you would be encouraged as well to note that our athletes are focusing on Tokyo and looking forward to participation and first-class competition as we become accustomed to, through the coaches themselves being able to design the programs that will have the athletes peaking during the most appropriate time, which is Tokyo, with the game starting to take place on July the 23rd for the opening.
Mm-hmm. And what you think, Mike, should be, or maybe, they should be, but maybe the norm post-pandemic? Let's look at 2022, for example. What do you see looking ahead as some of the things that even NACAC and member federations to an extent may have to adopt. Coming out of the pandemic, you just referred to in terms of coaches and athletes and the way they train. Sorry. So, what are some of the things you believe that we may have to adopt post-pandemic? Because, as you said, the pandemic has changed a number of things, a number of ways how we do things, even how you meet now. You meet virtually more often than ever. So, as president of NACAC, what is the thought pattern? What is the thinking going forward?
Well, first of all, we have to obviously develop, I'm talking to member federations in particular, are going to have to develop a strategic plan that is going to have to look at the what-if scenarios, because, again, we did not expect COVID, but COVID came along and we were able to adapt to those changing times very, very rapidly. We cannot obviously take anything for granted anymore. And so I think what is going to be critical is for us as an area association to have to continue the level of collaboration that we have developed with our member federations, as well as our athletes and the administrators of the sport. So we cannot continue to operate in the past like we may have in a vacuum. And so there has to be more inclusion of all the stakeholders. For example, coming out of this was very good that we've become more aligned or communicative with our athletes through the Athletes Commission. And so, it's not a single part. All those parts make a whole. And so I'm looking forward to bringing the NACAC family closer together. I'm looking forward to try to improve the brand of NACAC so people will understand and realize what NACAC is. And this is why when I receive invitations from yourself, persons such as yourself, I'm very open and transparent and willing to come on board to try to share with the listeners and the fans, the diaspora, who is and what is NACAC and what we're doing for the sport through our athletes and all the other supporting cast that make up the NACAC family.
Well, I want to say thanks and I appreciate, because folks, that's Mike Sands, is not now, but that has always been Mike Sands, very open, approachable, and always willing to share knowledge. And Mike, I know you yourself, you have been looking on the program at times, and there was something in recent program that caught your attention, regarding, I think it was Vernon Springer from St. Kitts, or a friend from Vernon Springer from St. Kitts that was saying something, and I think it caught your attention. So it just shows that Mike, despite being busy, despite his responsibility, he also finds time, to look at the program and to get a feel of what's, happening around the region. Mike, what in particular that caught your attention last week?
But Mike, to be honest with you, right? I mean, I look at sport, as a kid growing up, whether it was in the islands or New York City, or as I matriculate to Penn State, when the coaches would tell you that what you learn on the sporting field can take you through life, as a 15, 16, 18, even 21-year-old, you couldn't understand that. But as you now become more involved in life, you understand what it means, right? And so it takes all of us, they talk about the village to raise a child. Well, it takes us as administrators to not just look at the sport, but look at the sport as a whole that produces productive citizens, disciplined young people. And so at the end of the day, when I that is one of the reasons why I'm still in the sport, right? Because my heart is really there to try to help to build a better society. I get very frustrated when I hear the frustration, because I experience it in the voices of persons such as yourself and Springer, in the show, I think it was last week before, particularly when he spoke about the way that the administrators, and I say we as administrators because I have to put myself in that shoe, right? Whether the way we treat the athletes or the challenges that we have, not being able to manage professional athletes and not being able to move in the times with them and staying in place and not preparing for succession, or when I hear about the frustration that the athletes have trying to get to championship events or just events in general, it to me, it doesn't seem like it should be such a major challenge, because I use for example, we talk about transportation. Okay, we have to go to the government's hand in cap for the most part, but at the end of the day, yes, we as administrators have to plan more in advance to present ourselves to the government and not wait for the last minute. So one of the things that Vernon said that really I understood, right, is that at the end of the day, what happens is that we administrators collectively do not plan to the extent that we should, and then the events come along, and we knew that the events were coming, but the events come along, and because we have done no real planning or no other effort, we sit back and we wait, and then we run to the government and asking the government for support, and then we put the government in very uncompromising positions to believe that the government should do it because they do not want to embarrass the country because it's a national team. And I understand that and I get that. But I think the governments, the ministries of sports need to have meetings with the federations at the beginning of the year and let the public know. And you're asking the federations to present to us your schedule before the budget debate takes place. Present to us what your plans are for your international. And along with presenting it, you also must present your financial statement for the years that you would have saved the government's money or otherwise. If they do not do that, do not come to the government asking for funds to travel at the last minute. We're going to put it in the national budget as best as we can. And at the end of the day, and so you need to let the public know, because what happens is you hold the government hostage because you wait until the last minute and you go to the government to say, we need your support. And if the government didn't do it, then the government gets a bad name because the country becomes embarrassed. But the government will not get a bad name if the public is made aware that we are asking you to do this at the beginning of the year, so that at the end of the day, the government will be able to assist. Because we in the Caribbean, as you very well know, we rely very heavily on the government for support. So that was just one of the things that I was really, really intrigued with, because I really related to what Vernon was saying. And I think that warrants some discussion. What also warrants more discussion from our part is that we as administrators, and he talked about sports directors, I think he talked about the OECS getting together. And that needs to happen as well, because we all have something in common, one way or the other. And I think we can exchange ideas. And while the Bahamas will not be a member of the OCS, I'm talking about the Caribbean in general. I think we need to become more collaborative among ourselves, because we have a lot of common interests that is germane to all of us. And I think we could do a much better job as sports administrators with planning. We've become very successful on the world stage, in my opinion. I wouldn't say because of, but I say in spite of, because the planning is lacking to a great degree, in my opinion. But we are blessed and fortunate in two ways. Number one, we have a number of talented athletes, not just track and field athletes in our area. And on top of that, whether we like it or not to admit it, the fact is that the NCAA system, which a vast majority of our athletes attend, one of the best and competitive systems in the world, we are the beneficiary of our athletes being able to go through that system for their various sports and come back and make a contribution to the national representation of our sport. That may sound like a lot, but sorry about that.
No, but it's important, because you yourself, Mike, in fact, we should have included that at the start. You're a beneficiary of the system here in the U.S., both at primary, that's a high school, and tertiary in terms of college as well. I think it was South Shore. I think you
Sheepshead Bay High School.
Sheepshead Bay, yeah, and would have had a number of records for many years. I don't know if they're still standing. Many of those records, Mike. But it's important. An important point you make regarding because if you speak to athletes, they are, and you ask them about furthering their athletic career, etc., etc. I think uppermost in their mind is probably going to the US, being in a college, being in the college system, experiencing the college system, competing there. So how do you think, Mike, and it's important enough because it also, has some relation to NACAC, that you as president, one who has experienced it, just as how your predecessor, Mike, Victor Lopez, was at Rice. How do you think that NACAC should ensure that the correlation between the NCAA and our member federations, and even NACAC to an extent, is strengthened? Because, as you say, ultimately our athletes are benefiting from that program.
Well, I think the way we can continue to strengthen that relationship we have to deal with situations one-on-one. I mean, we can't just take it for granted. I mean, for example, and maybe I'm not the best example simply because I've been in the system long enough that I've been able to develop personal relationship with a number of coaches throughout the U.S. system. And so at the end of the day, we need to stand by our athletes, but we also need to develop relationships with the various institutions to ensure that doesn't become an antagonistic relationship. You have situations where, for example, we know that our athletes going to eventually, for the most part, head off to the U.S. for their second or their tertiary education. But you also have to be to understand that when the athlete does that, his priority becomes now that of the university that is paying his education and tuition. And so we have to develop that relationship where it does not become combative, because I've known the situations and also experienced it myself where athletes go off to university and the coaches or the administrators do not really take into consideration or understand that the university is investing in this particular athlete. And so at the end of the day, they believe that no matter what time they need the athlete to participate for the country, the athlete should make themselves available. But at the end of the day, that's what creates the antagonism, unless, of course, you develop that relationship with that particular institution and that athletic department and that coach to have discussions with them and not make it in such a situation whereby it's either or. So it has to be collective responsibility, but you should not put the athlete and the university at a point where you're saying, we need Mike to represent the Bahamas at the World Relays. But at the end of the day, the athlete has an obligation also to the school. So what does he do? So we need to be more collaborative with the various institutions that our athletes are attending. And that's what I would encourage the coaches and the administrators in our area to do.
In the same breath, Mike, do you support the move to pay college athletes?
Mike, I almost have to say yes. I tell you why. Because at the end of the day, sports is a big business. It's a huge business. I mean, when you look at the revenue that the respective universities derive from the performance of their athletes through their respective teams, right? And when I say yes guardedly, because I guess there's an argument to say, well, the athletes are being compensated through a college education, which they would not ordinarily be able to afford. I get that and I accept that. But whether it's an out and out pay or whether it's a more flexibility on what the athlete is able to get in terms of direct financial contribution, I think that has to be looked at more. But I am of the view that the compensation, the financial compensation, could be much better. If you don't want to say out and out pay them, I think the financial compensation should be a little bit better, because an athlete is restricted. Certainly in my day, you couldn't even you couldn't take anything. I mean, you couldn't go to dinner, if a booster came to town. And so those things are archaic, and I'm sure it's changing now, but it has to continue to evolve for the athletes to be a little bit more beneficial to their participation into the coffers of the respective universities.
And do you think, while we're on that, Mike, do you think that it's becoming a bit difficult for Caribbean athletes in particular to get into the NCAA system? And going forward, how much difficult it will become, where the universities and the NCAAs, the whole system is becoming a bit more stringent?
I think the challenge is for our area, and we have to be real about what we do in terms of the educational aspect of it. If the fact that a number of our athletes are matriculating to the U.S., then I think the onus is on the athlete themselves to ensure that number one, their grades are to the level that they can be able to be recruited, and number two, and it goes hand in hand, that the core education courses that they take are relevant to them seeking that scholarship or opportunity from the universities that they wish to attend. The United States have a system whereby, from junior college on up to the top universities, there's opportunities there for you. But at the end of the day, it becomes more difficult if you don't prepare yourself, like anything. You have to prepare yourself. You have to identify what you really want to go after and have your guidance counselor, your academic advisors follow that path. For example, I've not been very familiar with what they call the CXC exam. In the past we had the O levels, the A levels, and we have moved away from that. Because I don't know for the reasons why, but it may be a good thing because the O levels and the A levels back then may not have meant anything to trying to matriculate into the United States universities. But they tell you the SAT scores is now something that you need. You need to have a certain grade point average, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to study those things while you're on the playing field to improve your athletic ability. You also have to realize that in order to get where you want to go, you have to meet the requirements. And if the requirements are as part of the academic requirements, you cannot dismiss that as well.
Mm-hmm. Let me just get one question from the viewer. Rudy and Sylvan from Toronto is saying, would the athletes need to be vaccinated for the games? And let me assume NACAC championships or whatever it is being hosted by NACAC, including the Carifta Games?
The protocol, NACAC itself does not have any rules and guidelines. We are guided by the host federation, the host country, wherever it may be. For example, in the case of Bermuda is saying that you may have to be quarantined for 14 days, or that everyone that is not quarantined has to be vaccinated. So you present challenges because in our area where the young kids may not be vaccinated, then that raises another question. So NACAC itself does not have any basic requirements, but our desire, if you will, cannot and supersede the protocols and the rules and regulations of the member federations host country, because at the end of the day, it's a question of national health and national security. So whatever the governments of those respective countries say, we either have to comply with that, and persons have to become compliant in order for us to be able to have the events in those areas.
Okay, there was a question of that regarding the Carifta Games, Mike, and it whether or not Guyana is scheduled to host the Carifta Games. That was a question.
Yes, Guyana is. Bear in mind, as I indicated early on, right? Since last year, we've been trying to have the 49th edition of the games. Whenever the games are held, whenever the next games are held, whether it's Bermuda this year or next year, that will be the 49th edition. Guyana has bid, and the offer was extended to Guyana to become the host. Matter of fact, the host, it was approved that they would be the host of the 50th edition of the Carifta Games. Now, obviously, it was expected and anticipated that the 50th edition would be next year, and we're still on the cusp as to whether that would be the 50th edition next year, because if Carifta is not held this year, then obviously next year would be the 49th edition. So then it raises the question as to, does Guyana still host the 50th edition, which would then be in 2023 versus 2022, provided that we are unable to host the games this year. But yes, Guyana is slated to host the Carifta Games.
Any significance for that 50th games? Guyana really want to host the 50th?
well, Guyana, first of all, is a guest member of NACAC. They're not a full-fledged member. We have guest members, we have associate members. But Guyana, as I understand it, was one of the original signatories to the initial Carifta Games. And so on the basis of that, they are able to become a part of our Carifta family. As you very well know, we have some other member federations that are also guest members or associate members, such as Guadeloupe, Martinique, Curacao, and the likes. So we don't discriminate against our area. We're all about inclusion and not exclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well said, Mike. And there was another one regarding where and when the new venue and time for the U18 and U23 championships.
As I indicated, right now they're slated for Costa Rica, and the date right now is July the 9th through the 12th in Costa Rica.
Oh, Costa Rica, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Mike. So the focus for the next the next few hours and days will definitely be on Carifta, but the bigger picture overall for NACAC will be Tokyo. Okay, because that's the big fella. I don't know if Mike, as president of NACAC, a member of the World Athletics family, a member of the board of directors, you have a personal opinion. Do you think that Tokyo should go ahead?
Yes, Michael.
You do have a you do have an opinion.
No. Your question, specific to your question, yes, I think Tokyo should go ahead. It's very, and I think they're taking all the necessary precautions to ensure that it goes ahead. I think we, as a people of the world, okay, have to get used to the fact that life will not be the same as we know it several years ago, where we can move about freely, we can do whatever we want without regard to concerns of pandemic or whatever. We get a flu, we get the sniffles, we take a few aspirins, and boom, we drink a lot of fluid, and we're back on our feet, right? We didn't have to walk around with masks and everything else. At the end of the day, I for one, for example, I've already taken the first jab, and I'm looking forward to taking the second one in another week or two. Life has changed, right? And so and from where I stand, I think we are making a lot of to do out of what is going to become the norm in some way, shape, or form. And so the world, we can't say stop the world and let me off, because the world will continue, and we have to adjust to the changing times in the world. And so while we may not like some of the things that is happening, I hear a lot of complaints about, for example, Tokyo is not allowing outside spectators, and only persons germane to the function of the games and the athletes are going to be allowed in. And what are we going to do? We're going to argue with that? No, we need to make adjustments to accommodate ourselves and get used to the rules and regulations and protocols that the countries and institutions are putting in place for the safety, first and foremost, of, as I said earlier, national security, national health, to protect their citizens, and of course, by the same token, still be able to have events that go on, because the world is not going to stop and let us off.
Mm-hmm. Mike, Ato Bolden was on our program recently, and some of his comments generated quite a number of comments, interests, not just in the region, but internationally. But there's one thing I want to play for you, and I want to get your comment regarding sprinting in the Caribbean, whether or not the cupboard is bare. Listen to Ato, and then I'll come and hear your comments.
Yep.
Paul is saying, it's true. The Caribbean cupboard in sprinting is bare. Do you agree?
On the men's side, on the men's side, you look and you go, well, Trinidad and Tobago, forget it. I don't know. Certainly in the 100 meters, there is nobody from the Southern Caribbean that is going to factor in Tokyo. This is what I do for a living. I don't see it happening. I have already said I don't think that Jamaica is going to put anybody into the Olympic final. I'll be happy to be proven wrong, but you tell me who that person is going to be, given what the landscape looks like right now. I wouldn't say the cupboard is bare, because you have the last 3 Olympic champions and Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, who I think in 2019 had maybe her best ever season. So, Elaine Thompson, it's a shame that she's dealing with this Achilles tendon injury, which she doesn't seem to be able to get under control. But I think you sort of leave out the possibility that somebody sort of bubbling under could also step up. So I wouldn't say the Caribbean cupboard for sprinting is bare. Not on the women's side. On the men's side, it's not quite as good. Obviously, we have Karania and we have a few others, but no, it's not going to be as good as it has been for the last 10 years. I think that's a safer statement.
Okay, and Mike, and I think there was another question that he spoke a lot regarding your country folks, Gardner and Shawnee Miller-Ubo and others regarding the 400 meters. But Mike, your comment regarding the Caribbean and the sprinting prowess of the region.
Otto obviously would know the details of the what is in the pipeline much better than I would as a coach on the ground and having one of our top junior athletes from our area, and also being aware of what the others are doing, obviously for his strategic reasons and otherwise. So he would be in a better position to comment to that. But from what I heard and what I'm understanding of the question and his comments, I tend to share his view that while the cupboard may not be entirely bare, it's certainly a little scanty. Bearing in mind that, and every now and then a phenomenon comes along, right? Usain was a phenomenon. At the end of the day, and I think Usain drove the determination of a number of persons, because first of all, they all want to be like Usain, and then there was this hope against hope that I'm going to strive hard to beat a Usain or a Shelly Ann or Elaine. And so at the end of the day, or Alison Felix for that matter. So at the end of the day, I think the motivation for our athletes, Usain brought more than just his performance, using him as an example. But yes, I believe that we are a little scant right now to the extent to which we will not be experiencing, in my opinion, the phenomenon that we would experience in the Caribbean over the past several years or the decades, if you will. But then, having said that, we also have to accept and acknowledge that there's always also a building phase that you have to go back to the drawing board. And I think we are sort of on the cusp of that building phase. We may be a little bit above it. We're above the foundation, but we're not really at the point where the roof is ready to go on.
You're right, because I was about to ask you, very hopeful that, probably within the next year or two, that the Caribbean should return to what we once considered the glory days.
Yes, I think so. I think so.
Mm-hmm. Mike, and regarding the young, talented, and I don't want to just stress too much on just sprinters, because you know that the NACAC region of recent has been holding its own in the field events as well. For example, Anderson Peters of Grenada in the javelin, and we have had a few of those from Jamaica and others who have been, and in Trinidad and Tobago as well, competing in the field events, the javelin, the discus, the throws, to an extent, and then we have the jumpers from Cuba and others and things like that. So, but you getting the impression, Mike, that there is a good balance of our track and field competitiveness internationally?
Unquestionably, I think there was a time when we were just into the sprints, the 1 to the 400 meters. And now you can see, as you indicated, the person's name. And unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with them as I ought to be at this juncture. But yes, when I look at Grenada and what Grenada has been producing, when I look at Jamaica and I see what Jamaica has been producing in terms of the field events, I am very, very proud and pleased to see the progress that is being made. As a matter of fact, we are having discussions among ourselves as to how we can best enhance the production of those athletes. And with what Grenada is doing with their program, I don't want to preempt our discussions or plan, but I can tell you that we're taking a closer look to see how we can broaden the opportunities for our athletes in those particular areas of the field events where we seem to be having success. And obviously, there's something that they're doing in those areas that we have to emulate and try to find a way to drive more of our athletes to those events that could cause them to become successful on the area stage and indeed the world stage.
And the question was asked some moons ago on this same program regarding the involvement of the Cubans and others who, and you mentioned Grenada, for example, in the javelin, but using the exploits and the experience of, let's say, Cuba in the jumps, for example, and how NACAC can ensure that their expertise can be utilized throughout its member federations.
Well, we first of all, we are very proud of the performances that the Cubans have done over the years, particularly from their coaching. And I can tell you, Cuba has always been able to extend a helping hand and make available their coaches. And so from where I stand, from where NACAC stand, we obviously are looking closer to better collaborations with Cuba, and whether it means having their coaches become more available, and of course it comes with a cost, right? Become more available to lend their expertise, whether it's through camps and clinics, where we can have the trainers, because at the end of the day, while the Cuban coach, and since we're speaking specifically of them, right, can be contracted to the various federations for a period of time, you want to make sure that the coaches that we have identified, those coaches, to work in tandem with them so that they can train the trainers. And so we will not dismiss the contribution that the Republic of Cuba's program through their coaches has done for our program on a wider scale.
Mike, getting ready to wrap up now. Local time has flied, but one of the things I really wanted to ask you, Mike, in terms of the financial pinch this pandemic would, of course, the NACAC region. Has it really taken a toll on, the what I should say, the resources and the availability of resources for NACAC, and how, probably, if you briefly can tell us how you hope, if it does, how you hope you can rebuild such?
Michael, the financial resources, first of all, our resources come from World Athletics for the most part. And also we look towards sponsorship, right? We have not been able to secure sponsorship. As a matter of fact, quite the contrary. Our apparel sponsor, which is a brand company, they've decided, they sent us a letter that they no longer can support our program. This is the NACAC. And so we've lost some revenue stream from that. And so at the end of the day, finances is always a problem, right? And this is why I always say, and it's not a commercial, Michael, but just permit me, I always say to those in the sound of my voice, if you're in a position, let us talk about how we can have partnership with your product and with your services to the benefit and the development of our area athletes. And so our diaspora is very wide. And so the funding, finances is a problem. I'll give you the example I'm speaking about. Right now, as I told you, we want to put on the NACAC New Life Invitational, right? It's going to require a great deal of money, right? We don't have all the funds, but yet still we're planning towards making the event happen. And we want it to happen in Miramar, Florida on June the 5th. But we're not stopping our planning because we want to bring all of our area athletes into Miramar, Florida, or Nassau, Bahamas, if you will, wherever they can be hosted, because we want them to have a competition before going to Olympic Games, and in particular the relay countries, Jamaica, Bahamas, Trinidad, all our area countries that want to have a final spot in the Olympic Games and or sharpen their skills. So finance is always a challenge, and that's where I don't have sleepless nights beyond anything else than finances. I sleep very well, but when I think about how we're going to fund this, then I have sleepless nights. So I put an appeal to you and your audience to come to the rescue of our diaspora.
Right, Mike. Our final question, here it is. Clever Deputy, controversial question. What is NACAC's position on this new transgender phenomena being presently / fiercely discussed in the US? Whether this has caught the attention of NACAC or they are in a wait and see mode presently?
Well, Mike? obviously, we are watching the situation. We believe in creating opportunities for all. Obviously, the issue of the transgender, I think, has to be addressed because at the end of the day, the question really is how level is the playing field if you take persons into your sport that were not born a particular way, but for whatever reason, because of hormone imbalance or the XY chromosome, whatever. I mean, it has to be taken in consideration, but the playing field certainly is not a level playing field as if you were born in a certain way. And that requires a discussion because on the one hand, you're saying don't do drugs, but on the other hand, you're saying someone that has been born a certain way must take drugs to be able to compete in a certain category. The jury is still out on that one.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Mike. It has been a pleasure, and always willing to discuss issues of just not NACAC, but track and field sports in particular. And I want to thank you for your accepting the invitation and being on the program this evening.
Always a pleasure, Mike. Thank you. And again, like I said, to my friends in New York and wherever, come to the forefront and help us continue to survive through our young people's performances on the area and the world stage. Thanks again for having me.
Okay, then. Thank you very much. So, folks, as you heard, Mike has been making an appeal, and hopefully that folks will come out and support NACAC, support track and field in the NACAC region. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Stay safe.
Okay, same to you. All right, then. So, folks, there you got it from Mike Sands, the president of NACAC, live in Nassau in the Bahamas. And speaking about, the NACAC family. But just to let you know, folks, that coming up on Saturday from 1 o'clock, we have the great legend, Sir Curtly Ambrose. Sir Curtly Ambrose will be on the program to speak with us. 2 hours of Sir Curtly Ambrose. We'll, discuss all about his time as one of the most fiercest bowler in world cricket. Yes, Sir Curtly Ambrose will be on the program. He has accepted our invitation, and he will be on the program on Saturday. So join us from 1 o'clock in the afternoon